The gutless alien diplomat cringed and cowered under the withering glare of Captain Matthew Howard, a man who embodied the fearless spirit that separated humanity from the cowardly galactic herd. "Please, you must help us. The Rektar will slaughter us all if we don't get your military assistance," the sniveling Denobulan envoy begged, flinching as spittle flew from Howard's contemptuous snort. The desperate plea for aid had arrived just days ago, routed from a beleaguered Denobulan planet on the verge of falling to the vicious onslaught of the insectoid Vrektar menace. The Denobulan-Vrektar War had already dragged on for decades, the lopsided conflict seeing the once proud Denobulan Empire pushed to the brink of collapse under the vicious talons of their merciless foe. When the distress signal reached Earth, newly welcomed into the galactic community, an emergency session of the United Nations was hastily convened to debate a response to the Denobulan entreaty. The chamber buzzed with the muttered consternation of wary ambassadors, unwilling to entangle their nations in the bloody quagmire of an interstellar war that was not their own. Humanity, the new kids on the galactic block, had only recently begun to ply the star lanes and stake its claim among the established spacefaring civilizations. Many felt that leaping into the fray to pull the Denobulans' chestnuts out of the fire was a fool's gambit. Humanity had its own problems, and scant resources to spare for a rescue mission that smacked of suicide. Only one voice spoke forcefully in favor of intervention, that of Captain Matthew Howard, taking the podium in his crisp U.S. Army dress uniform. It was Earth's time to step into the light, he urged, to prove that humanity would be no shrinking violet in the face of injustice and brutality among the stars. Where others saw risk, Howard saw opportunity, the chance for humans to show the galaxy what they were made of. "This is our moment," Howard declared, his words ringing through the chamber and pricking the pride of every human heart. "We cannot leave the Denobulan to face extinction at the hands of Rektar butchers. If not us, then who? If not now, then when?" One by one, the naysayers fell silent under the piercing clarity of his bold challenge. And so it was decided. A small expeditionary force under Howard's command would be dispatched to the front lines to bolster the faltering Denobulan defenses. It was a long shot, but the humans were determined to make their mark as soldiers and allies. Howard and his eager volunteers, the best each nation had to offer, shipped out on a fleet Denobulan transport. The situation they found upon reaching the besieged planet was dire. At the last remaining Denobulan stronghold, a weary commander Theros broke the grim news. Their forces could only hold out for days against the next Rektar push. The planet had to be held at all costs, for it harbored rich deposits of the rare mineral used to power FTL drives, a resource that would spell doom for the Denobulan and uncontested conquest for the Rektar should it fall into the insectoid's ruthless claws. The desperate Theros begged the human reinforcements to focus on evacuating civilians, while the Denobulan made their last stand. Howard would have none of it. He and his troops had come spoiling for a fight. "We're not here to run, we're here to send those Rektar bastards straight to hell," he growled as his men cheered. Despite being outnumbered 100 to 1, Howard was determined to fortify the Denobulan position and break the Rektar invasion here, or die trying. The human warriors threw themselves into the work with a relish that unnerved their pacifistic Denobulan allies. They seemed to embrace the prospect of bloody battle with whoops of excitement, utterly alien to the grim Denobulan mindset. Not for the first time, Theros wondered if these audacious humans were insanely brave, or perhaps just insane. Either way, Howard and his bold band of Terrans were all that stood between the Denobulan and the savage ferocity of the Rektar. The stage was set for the humans' first great challenge on the galactic battlefield, with only their courage, tenacity, and warlike spirit to turn the tide against near impossible odds. Humanity's mettle, for good or ill, was about to be put to the ultimate test. The Rektar attack came at dawn, a seething swarm of chitin and teeth that crashed against the Denobulan defenses like a tidal wave, but the humans were ready for them. Captain Matthew Howard rallied his troops with a battle cry that rang out across the scorched battleground. "Come on, you apes! You want to live forever? Let's show these bugs what humans are made of. With Howard at the vanguard, the human forces surged forward in a daring offensive strike, shoulder to shoulder with their denobulan allies. The sharp crack of human assault rifles and the sizzling blast of their energy weapons joined the din of battle as they met the Vrektar head-on. The insectoid horde faltered, momentarily caught off guard by the ferocity and superior technology of the human troops. Howard pressed the advantage, leading a small squad in a flanking maneuver that saw them blast their way behind the Vrektar line. With a few well-placed shots from their portable railguns, Howard and his men reduced the towering Vrektar plasma artillery batteries to smoldering wreckage. Zorgax, the Vrektar commander, let out a seething hiss of rage at the setback. With a shriek of alien fury, he ordered a devastating air assault from his orbiting hive ships. The sky darkened with the buzzing swarm of Vrektar strike craft that descended on the human and denobulan positions, raining down a blistering hail of plasma fire. But Howard's troops stood their ground, shouldering their portable missile launchers and filling the air with a deadly web of contrails. The human weapons found their marks, sending dozens of the alien ships spiraling down in flames to crunch into the war-torn Earth. In the chaos, Howard's second-in-command, Lieutenant James Hawkins, fought his way to the denobulan shield generator at the heart of their defensive fortifications. The experimental device thrummed with building power as Hawkins interfaced his suit's systems and prayed the damn thing would work. With a crackling roar, the generator flared to life, projecting an impenetrable dome of shimmering force that repelled the incoming bombardment from the Vrektar ships still in orbit. The aliens' weapons splashed harmlessly against the shield, buying the defenders some desperately needed breathing room. Under the shield's protective bubble, the real bloody work began. The Vrektar ground troops, a roiling mass of countless insectoid bodies, threw themselves at the human and denobulan lines in an unrelenting assault. The very ground shuddered with the impact of their charge. But the human forces were dug in deep, pouring withering fire into the alien ranks from heavily fortified machine gun nests. The Vrektar advance crumpled against a killing field of mines and razor wire, alien bodies piling up in twitching mounds as the human weapons scythed them down. Yet for every Vrektar that fell, a dozen more surged forward in an inexorable tide, heedless of losses. Where the aliens' superior numbers told, the battle devolved into brutal close-quarters combat. Vrektar warriors, all razor-edged talons and dripping mandibles, hurled themselves at the human troops with berserker fury. The men met them head-on, mechanically enhanced muscles surging as they wielded powered gauntlets and pulse-bladed combat knives in the vicious melee. Theros, his face grim as he surveyed the tactical displays, knew all too well that even the human's valor and fighting prowess could only hold out so long against such odds. He turned to his adjutant, mandibles tight with urgency. "Initiate civilian evacuation protocols immediately. We must get our people off-world before the Vrektar breach our lines." As the desperate fighting raged, a convoy of beleaguered denobulan transports fled for the dubious safety of orbit, ferrying load after load of shell-shocked survivors. But the Vrektar were not about to let their prey escape so easily. The refugee ships found themselves swarmed by predatory hunter-killer drones that buzzed out from the looming enemy fleet in orbit to tear into the defenseless transports with sadistic relish. The denobulan ships, never built for war, could only flee in desperation as the cruel drones began to pick them off one by one. Howard, seeing the unfolding slaughter on his tactical display, knew he had to act. Over the comm, he barked orders to Sergeant Takahashi, his tech specialist. "Tak, I need you to hack into those denobulan satellites and see if you can turn them on those drones. It's the only way those civvies are going to make it out of the system." As Theros listened in mounting despair, he couldn't help but marvel at the human's audacity to even suggest such a thing. But as he watched Takahashi's fingers fly across the control panel, the denobulan commander realized the humans might just be crazy enough to pull off the impossible. With a final triumphant keystroke, Takahashi crowed in victory as he seized control of the satellite defense grid. The orbital platforms thrummed with power, swiveling to unleash a storm of megajoule railgun rounds that whittled the attacking drones out of the sky. With their pursuers destroyed or driven off, the limping evacuation ships fled for the safety of FTL. Theros breathed a ragged sigh of relief as the last refugee transport winked off the system plot. His people were safe, for now, but the battle on the ground still hung in the balance. With their air support stripped away, Howard and his troops now faced the full fury of the Rektar onslaught. The insectoid warriors threw themselves at the human positions in a renewed frenzy, heedless of losses, as they sought to overrun the defenses by sheer weight of numbers. Zorgax himself spearheaded the assault, his monstrous form sheathed in a heavily armed mech suit that shrugged off anything the humans could throw at it. Howard gritted his teeth as he shouldered a bulky anti-tank launcher. Around him, his men were falling back, unable to hold against the relentless tide of alien bodies that threatened to swamp them. The launcher bucked in Howard's grip as he sent a screaming rocket corkscrewing into Zorgax's metal monster. The warhead detonated against the mech's leg joint in a sulfurous fireball, nearly toppling the mighty war machine. Zorgax let out a hideous screech of rage as his suit staggered drunkenly, sparks flaring from its mangled limb. With its master's control faltering, the tide of Rektar finally ground to a halt. But it was only a momentary reprieve for the defenders. Howard and a grim-faced Theros had no illusions about their chances. The enemy was just too many, and the defenders too few. Already, fresh waves of Rektar reinforcements were swarming from their landing craft as the humans and Denobulan fell back to their last redoubt, the planetary command bunker. The thick blast doors shuddered as the defenders hurried through, ominous booms reverberating through the armored confines as the Rektar threw themselves at the entrance. Lieutenant Hawkins worked desperately to seal the portal, his face pale in the flickering emergency lights. "That's it, Captain. They're locked out, for now. Not sure how long that door will hold once they bring up their heavy gear, though." Howard nodded grimly as he took stock of their dire situation. Most of his men were nursing wounds, propped up against the walls or lying still on hastily assembled triage tables. The scent of blood and sweat hung thick in the stale, reprocessed air, and that air, he knew, wouldn't last long either. Theros, mandibles flexing in agitation, confirmed the unspoken fears in a tight hiss. "The bunker's life support systems were damaged in the attack. We have a few hours at best, even with emergency power." After that, Howard took a deep breath of the already thinning air and steeled himself. They were out of time and out of options. Over their heads, the sound of screeching metal and scorching plasma torches announced that their ruthless enemy was already burning and drilling their way through the bunker's final defenses. "There may be one way," the Denobulan commander murmured, as if to himself. Howard fixed him with a piercing stare, demanding answers. Stiffly, as if every word carried the weight of a death sentence, Theros laid out their last, terrible recourse. The planet's star, like the world it once nurtured, was dying. Now, at the end of its life, that red giant teetered on the very brink of supernova, a catastrophe barely restrained by the stabilizing effects of Denobulan stellar engineering. Technology that could be turned against them, Theros explained, his voice cold and distant. A single command from the planetary defense grid could destabilize those forces, turn that simmering dead star into a cataclysmic funeral pyre for the planet, the Rektar, the invaluable mineral deposits they sought to claim, and every remaining Denobulan soul huddled beneath its swollen red bulk. One last act of defiance to deny the enemy their prize. Howard reeled as the terrible implications sank in. To even consider such an act, it went against everything he believed, every oath he had sworn as a soldier. And yet, as the pounding on the sealed blast door grew more intense, as the readouts of their dwindling air ticked ever downward, he knew the awful calculus of war. The choice fell to him. Either condemn this world to burn in the fires of its own sun, or let the Rektar seize a prize that could spell the end of the Denobulan people, and a power that would leave the Rektar unchecked to rampage across the stars. With agonizing finality, Howard knew that billions more could die under the iron heel of Rektar conquest. Through the pain of an impossible decision, through the haze of fatigue and blood loss, the human captain looked up to meet his denobulan counterpart's eyes. In that haunted gaze, he saw mirrored the same awful conviction, the same bitter commitment that now hardened in his own heart. Howard drew himself up, ignoring the bitter ache of abused muscles beneath his battle-scarred armor. The voice that emerged was hard and cold, an implacable declaration bereft of doubt. Do it. Send the codes. If these bastards want this world so badly, I say we give it to them. Theros nodded, a solemn gesture sealing a devil's bargain. In the shadows of that besieged bunker beneath a dying star, a pact had been sealed in blood and bitter sacrifice. The denobulan and their human allies would make their stand here, buying time with their lives for the doomed world's stellar engineers to commit their unspeakable act of destruction. One world lost, a billion lives consigned to oblivion, to save the rest of a species, to put that terrible power forever beyond the grasp of a pitiless foe. The math was brutal in its simplicity. As the first jagged rents appeared in the bunker's straining roof, molten metal dribbling down in searing rivulets, Howard hefted his weapon and turned to face the onrushing enemy one last time. Around him, the haggard remnants of his company, his band of brothers, formed up with weapons raised, a thin line of defiant humanity against the chittering, shrieking tide of death that boiled through the shattered defenses. The thunder of weapons fire and the meaty impacts of talon on steel filled the world, a cacophony of savage warfare fit to be the last sounds a dying planet ever heard. And high above, a tortured sun, put to the question by its own children, began to swell with the uncaged fury of its final moments. There would be no retreat, no quarter, no mercy in this last crucible at the end of days. Only the ruin of the vanquished and the terrible glory of a victory bought with the coin of a world's immolation. Such was the price of war between the stars, a cost few species were willing to bear. But the humans, the denobulan now knew, were capable of a ruthlessness that both terrified and awed them. As the bunker shook with the first tremors of a star tearing itself apart, as the Rektar screeched their fury and threw themselves into the teeth of the human guns, Theros realized that his species' survival might well depend on the tenacity of these strange, savage allies. Creatures. As the bunker shuddered under the relentless Rektar assault, Matthew Howard turned to face Theros, his face etched with unyielding commitment. "We can't do this," Howard growled, hitting his fist against the console. "Billions of lives, Theros. We can't just erase them for some damned rocks." Theros's mandibles clicked in agitation. "And what of the trillions more who will perish if the Rektar obtain these rocks? The mineral wealth of this world could fuel their war machine for centuries. We have no choice." Their argument was cut short by a horrific screeching sound. Howard's head snapped towards the bunker entrance. "Plasma cutters," he muttered. "They're through the outer defenses." With practiced efficiency, Howard barked orders to his remaining troops. "Form a perimeter around the command center. Hawkins, take the denobulan contingent and secure those auxiliary tunnels. If these bugs want in, make them pay for every inch." The bunker erupted into frenzied activity as soldiers rushed to fortify their positions. The acrid smell of ozone filled the air as energy weapons powered up. Suddenly, the massive blast doors exploded inward in a shower of molten metal. Through the smoke and debris, a tide of chitinous bodies surged forward. Howard stood his ground, pulse rifle chattering as he cut down wave after wave of Rektar warriors. "Eat lead, you overgrown cockroaches!" he roared, his weapon's muzzle flash illuminating the chaos around him. The narrow confines of the bunker worked to the defenders' advantage, funneling the Rektar into a brutal killing field. But their numbers seemed endless, and gradually the human lines began to buckle under the onslaught. A massive form loomed out of the smoke, Zorgax himself, his damaged mech suit still a terrifying sight. Missile pods deployed from its shoulders, unleashing a barrage that shook the entire bunker. "Tak!" Howard shouted over the din of battle. Can you do something about that walking tank? Sergeant Takahashi's fingers flew across his datapad. On it, Cap. Just need to... Got it! For a moment, Zorgax's war machine froze, its weapon systems going dark. But the Rektar commander was far from beaten. With a hiss of hydraulics, compartments in the mech's chassis slid open, disgorging a noxious green vapor. Gas! Howard yelled. Fall back to the command center. As the toxic fumes spread, alarms began to blare. The bunker's life support was failing, unable to cope with the corrosive Rektar compound. Howard made a snap decision. Everyone, into the command room, now! As the last of his troops stumbled through the doorway, Howard activated the denobulin shield generators. A shimmering energy field sprang to life, holding back the toxic atmosphere. From their last refuge, the defenders poured fire into the advancing Vrektar, but their ammunition was running low, and the shield wouldn't hold forever. Just as hope seemed lost, a console lit up. Denobulin ships had arrived in orbit. Theros moved towards the Doomsday device controls, but Howard caught his arm. Wait, he said, a desperate plan forming. I've got one last idea. Keying the comm system, Howard hailed the Denobulin fleet. This is Captain Matthew Howard. We need emergency transport for my entire team. Beam us directly to your flagship. As Zorgax's forces finally breached the command room, Howard felt the familiar tingle of a transporter beam. In a flash of light, he and his battered troops materialized on the bridge of a Denobulin warship. Without missing a beat, Howard turned to the stunned Denobulin commander. I need control of your tractor beams, he said. All of them. What? The alien captain sputtered. Why? Howard's eyes gleamed with fierce intensity. We're going to move that star. A chorus of disbelief echoed across the bridge, but Howard pressed on. It's unstable already. If we can nudge it towards the planet, the gravity will tear it apart. We'll wipe out the Rektar without sacrificing the entire system. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then the Denobulin captain nodded. It's insane, but we have no other options. Do it. Howard sprang into action, directing the Denobulin ships into position. Powerful tractor beams lanced out, latching onto the massive stellar body. On the planet below, Zorgax realized too late what was happening. The sky began to glow an ominous red as the star inched closer, its gravitational pull already beginning to tear the world apart. We've done it, Howard breathed, watching the destruction unfold on the display. Now get us the hell out of here. With a lurch, the Denobulin fleet jumped to light speed, narrowly escaping as the system erupted in a cataclysmic explosion. As the blinding light faded from the view screens, a ragged cheer went up from the assembled humans and Denobulins. They had saved the Empire from annihilation, but Howard's face remained grim. An entire world had been sacrificed in the process, its riches and wonders lost forever to the void of space. Space. The cost had been high, but they'd won the day. As the Denobulin flagship dropped out of hyperspace, cheers erupted across the bridge. Matthew Howard found himself surrounded by grateful aliens, their mandibles clicking in what he assumed was their version of applause. Theros approached, his exoskeleton gleaming under the ship's lights. Captain Howard, your strategy was unorthodox but effective, Theros said, extending a multi-jointed appendage. You've saved countless Denobulin lives today. Howard grasped the alien limb, feeling the rough texture of its carapace. We all did what had to be done, he replied, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. As the initial euphoria faded, the reality of their situation set in. The minerals they'd fought so hard to protect were now scattered across half a solar system. Howard paced the bridge, his mind racing. They'd bought time, but at what cost? Theros, he said suddenly, turning to face the Denobulin commander. We need to talk about what comes next. In the ship's war room, Howard laid out his plan to the assembled Denobulin leadership. The Vrektar will regroup, he explained, gesturing to a holographic map of nearby star systems. We need to hit them hard before they can recover. Murmurs of disagreement rippled through the alien officers. One stepped forward, his carapace a deep blue. "Captain, we've fought defensively for centuries. What you propose is unprecedented." Howard leaned in, his eyes blazing with intensity. "Exactly. They won't expect it. My human forces can lead the charge, soften them up. Your fleets can follow, securing the systems we take." The debate raged for hours. Howard argued passionately, countering every objection with tactical analysis and raw tenacity. Finally, Theros raised a limb for silence. "It's ambitious," the Denobulan commander said slowly. "Perhaps too ambitious. But I believe it's our best chance. Captain Howard, you have my support." Over the following weeks, Howard threw himself into preparations. He coordinated with Earth, requisitioning every available ship and soldier. Lieutenant Hawkins became his right hand, working tirelessly to integrate human and Denobulan combat doctrines. The day of the invasion arrived. Howard stood on the bridge of the lead assault carrier, surveying the armada spread out before him. Thousands of ships, human and Denobulan alike, waited for his command. "All units, this is Captain Howard," he broadcast across the fleet. "You know the plan. Hit hard, hit fast. Today we take the fight to the enemy. For Earth, for Denobula, for every world these bastards have threatened. Attack." The battle was chaos incarnate. Howard's human vanguard tore into Vrektar positions, drawing out their fleets. Denobulan transports slipped through the gaps, ferrying troops to resource-rich worlds. On Klendathu, a hellish volcanic world, Howard led his Marines in a desperate defense of a critical mineral processing facility. Vrektar swarms blackened the sky, their chitinous bodies gleaming in the glow of lava flows. "Hold the line!" Howard roared over the din of battle. His pulse rifle spat death, cutting down wave after wave of insectoid warriors. A shadow fell across the battlefield. Howard looked up to see a massive mech suit towering over the Vrektar lines. Zorgax had arrived. "Hawkins!" Howard shouted into his comm. "I need a strike team. We're taking out their command center." What followed was a desperate race through underground tunnels, fighting every step of the way. Howard's team dwindled as they pushed deeper, facing off against Zorgax's elite guard. Finally, they reached the central reactor. Howard's hands flew over the controls, overriding safeties and pushing the system to critical mass. Alarms blared as the chamber filled with Vrektar troops. "It's over, human," Zorgax's voice boomed from his mech suit. Howard met the alien warlord's compound eyes. "You're right," he said, reaching for the detonator. "It is." The explosion rocked the entire planet. When the dust settled, Lieutenant Hawkins found himself in command of the battered human forces, but the Vrektar were in full retreat, their leadership decapitated by Howard's sacrifice. Hawkins rallied the troops, leading a series of lightning strikes that drove the remaining Vrektar from Klendathu. As Denobulan ships moved in to secure the hard-won world, Hawkins gazed out at the stars. Somewhere out there, more battles waited. The war was nowhere near the end. Lieutenant James Hawkins stood on the bridge of the Denobulan flagship, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The swarm of red dots representing the Vrektar fleet grew larger by the second. "All ships, battle stations," he ordered, his voice calm but imbued with tension. "Prepare for orbital drop." The massive human drop pods hung in the void, each one a steel cocoon carrying tanks, APCs, and power-armored troops. As they plummeted through Uranus' atmosphere, the sky lit up with anti-aircraft fire. "Evasive maneuvers!" Hawkins barked. But it was too late for many. Pod after pod exploded in blinding flashes, their occupants vaporized in an instant. On the ground, Corporal Sarah Chen felt her stomach lurch as her pod slammed into the planet's surface. The hatch blew open, and she stumbled out, pulse rifle at the ready. "Move! Move! Move!" she shouted, rallying her squad as they charged towards the looming silhouette of the Vrektar shipyards. The air filled with the screech of alien weaponry. Plasma bolts sizzled past Chen's head, close enough to singe her hair. She dove behind the smoking wreckage of a Vrektar drone, her armor scraping against the alien metal. "Jenkins, suppressing fire. Rodriguez, flank left," Chen ordered, popping up to squeeze off a burst from her rifle. A Rektar warrior's head exploded in a spray of ichor. The human forces pushed forward relentlessly, their tanks crushing waves of smaller drones underfoot. But the Vrektar fought with suicidal commitment, hurling themselves at the invaders in a tide of chitin and claws. Days blurred together in a nightmarish haze of constant combat. Chen lost track of how many times she'd reloaded, how many aliens she'd killed. The stench of burned flesh and alien blood clung to everything. Finally, a familiar voice crackled over the comm. "This is Hawkins. We've linked up with Denobulan ground forces. Push to Sector 7 for extraction." As Chen's battered squad fought their way to the rendezvous point, they saw towering Denobulan walkers stomping through the ruins, crushing the last pockets of Vrektar resistance. Hawkins stood atop a captured Vrektar ship, surveying the devastation. His face was grim as he turned to Theros. "We've won the battle," he said softly, "but the war is far from finished." The Denobulan clicked his mandibles in agreement. "Our long-range sensors have detected—" An alarm blared, cutting him off. Hawkins's eyes widened as he saw the massive fleet signature approaching. "It's the Queen," he breathed. "All ships, form up! Defensive positions around the shipyards!" The space above Oranos erupted into chaos. Human and Denobulan ships fought desperately against the overwhelming Rektar force. Kamikaze drones slammed into Allied vessels, tearing them apart in fiery explosions. On the bridge of his flagship, Hawkins watched in horror as the defensive line began to crumble. "Sir," a young ensign called out, her voice shaking, "we can't hold them much longer." Hawkins closed his eyes, steeling himself for what he had to do. He pulled out a data chip, Takahashi's final gift. "Get me a direct link to the Vrektar command network," he ordered. "It's time to end this." As the virus spread through the enemy fleet, ship after ship went dark, weapons turning on their own allies. Hawkins watched in grim silence as the Rektar tore themselves apart. When it was over, he slumped in his chair, the weight of what he'd done pressing down on him. Theros approached, mandibles clicking softly. "You saved us all," the Denobulan said. Hawkins looked up, his eyes haunted. "At what cost?"
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.